This podcast is hosted in collaboration with the Comsmith, the Peterborough podcast. We're sharing stories about why Peterborough is a great place to work, live and play. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about Codem and how you set it up, when you set it up, and what was the thinking behind it, really.
Okay. Well, we, as a business, Codem Composites is an engineering business. We specialise in advanced materials, predominantly carbon fibre. So that's a lot of what we do. Our markets cut across Formula One, specifically Mercedes and McLaren. We do some defence work. We're in the aerospace sector as well, and automotive. We do things for bicycles and furniture and all manner of things. So but in essence, we make things out of carbon fibre, I guess, in simple terms.
Okay. How did you get involved? How did it all sort of start? That? I mean, what's your background as well?
Well, the business has been going 16 years. Prior to that, I'd been in the industry with previous employers, starting right back to the days of companies like Fairline Boats, where we were making things out of GRP. But as I sort of moved through and went to different organisations in that sort of sphere, in that sort of composite sphere, a couple of those companies were starting to use some of those advanced materials. And you look at it, quite frankly, and go, that's the future. You know, this GRP stuff's a thing of the past. It smells horrible and it's difficult to work with. And that was the future. It was, a real sort of eureka moment in that respect. Because it is a true engineering medium. It's very predictable. You can do things with it. You can actually design with that medium in mind. So it looked like the obvious solution to a lot of engineering problems.
So how's it grown then? You said 16 years ago,
Yeah.
And it's grown. Where did you start, and now where are we now?
We started in Sawtry, just down the A1, little village just down the A1, in about 3,000 square foot unit, with half a dozen of us. And as time went on, we then took the unit next door as well, and then the unit next door to that. And that growth has been very organic. We've continued to sort of build on the workforce as we go, and also expand the capabilities of the business. The vision was always to be a complete end-to-end provider. So from design all the way through to the manufacture of tooling, jigging, machining, component parts, assembly, etc. So our customers come to us in many instances where they know that composites is the solution to their engineering problem, but don't know much more than that.
Yeah,
They just know
how.
this is
Yeah,
exactly. So we work very, very closely with their engineering department. They will tell us it needs to be this big, it's got to fit in this box, it's got to do X, Y, and Z. And then we work on designing the tooling and the palette of materials, the manufacturing methodologies, just to get them to where they want to be and satisfy that need that they have, whether that's, again, automotive, satcoms, or whatever that is, whatever the brief is.
Okay. So then in that regard, then give us an example of one customer, one brand that worked with you and how it started and where we are now then, a successful one.
Well, I think one of the biggest projects that we were involved in, and our longest customer, to be fair, has been in the outside broadcast satellite equipment. So if you want to move data, obviously, which is what SATCOMs is all about,
yeah,
and you want to move more data, you either get yourself a bigger dish or a bigger amplifier or a combination of the both, or you work at higher frequencies. When you move at higher frequencies, then the accuracy of the dish itself becomes more important. Back in the days of transmitting on C-band, you could get away with a dustbin lid, quite frankly. But it's moved on significantly since then, because everybody's into microwave.
Yeah.
Because they want to send a lot of data. Now, when a dish is designed, the starting point is what section of that parabolic curve it needs to be. If you imagine a torch, for example, you turn a torch on and the light goes out. When you're sending data, you want it to go into a column. So rather than just this sort of section of a cone that would be a torch, for example, it's a parabolic curve. So all the data is going into a column to hit the satellite. So they have to be much more accurate. They also need to be working in quite inhospitable environments. So carbon fibre is pretty neutral. You can put it in the desert or you can put it in the poles and it will remain the same. It's also lightweight, of course.
Okay.
So that's how and why that sort of business came into the world of composites, and why composites have supported it sort of going forward, in simple terms. So yeah, and we are still making some of those products sort of 15, 16 years later.
Okay, so when you explain it like that, it sounds very simple, but I can imagine there's a lot of. I mean, you must have some very clever people working for you, a range of skills and.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is that range. It is about building that team, and that's been the process of the business over the period. Like I say, it's been an organic growth. When we got to a certain size and scope, which was sort of getting on for 10 years ago, we decided that we needed to put everything under one roof, scale up the business from being a small business into a sort of more of a medium-sized enterprise, if you like, which is why we came here, consolidated all of those things. We put in a much more robust management team, with specialists who could help manage us and get us better organized, to put in those sort of standard operating procedures, for example, and structure the business in a way that we could all recognize. It was fine early on. It was me and the production manager and a few guys. It's all on the back of a phone packet. We all knew what we were doing. But as you scale up, then the business needed better foundations, really, which is why we were very lucky and are very lucky. Our operations director, Sharon, joined us, having had 7 years as head of engineering resource for Marshall's Aerospace, for example. So what she brought to the party was getting us organised, creating that visibility on the product life cycle, from quotation all the way through the processes of the business, and all through those manufacturing processes as well, that we could all point to, we all knew, and there was proper structure within the organisation. If it doesn't have those foundations, then it's just not going to grow. It's as simple as that. We're just more people doing the same thing. So she brought a lot of those skills to us, things that I don't have. So it was important to then build on the team. We brought on a business development manager nearly 3 years ago. We have specialists in our supply chain and the QMS. So it is about sort of building those special skills to help the business to grow.
So, how has Peterborough been for you then? So you stayed here, obviously, or you've moved from Swansea to here. It's a good place to be for those sort of things you described there.
Well, it was critical to be local.
Yeah,
that's the first thing. We all know that Peterborough's got a great history of engineering in the past. When Peter Brotherhood's was a massive facility here. We still have Perkins, Baker Perkins, and Stowart, Caterpillar, and Mollins. We had an whole army of engineers here in Peterborough. I think we're probably only a generation or two away from losing a lot of that, and that's a bit of a shame. When we do the careers fairs and when we're talking to young people, and they come and engage with us and talk about composites, they go, "Oh yeah, my dad was an engineer here, and my uncle, and so on and so forth." Everybody knew somebody or was related to somebody with an engineering background. So consequently, the resource was here for us. It's got a good college. The infrastructure around here is good. It's an expanding city, isn't it? It's a very, very fast growing city. So potentially the resource is there for us. So it's all about sort of joining that up in many ways. And it's a good city. It's diverse, which for me is a strength. I know others may disagree, but I think that's one of our strengths. It's got a beautiful cathedral. It's got a river running through it. There are a whole bunch of things that you can tick off and go, yeah, that's a positive. That's a positive. You can always find the things that annoy us about the city, but in general, it's a good city.
Because of course, in this regard, I mean, you spoke about diversity there. I would imagine that you've got ideas being brought from across the world and like different ways of thinking and looking at things as well, which is crucial for somewhere like this, I would imagine.
Well, of course. I mean, we don't make any carbon fibre, the actual raw fibres. We don't make the raw materials here in the UK. It all comes from Europe, Far East. So consequently, there needs to be that sort of openness and vision about what's going on. So yeah, it has that sort of vibe about Peterborough in many ways, I think, where it wants to do better. It wants to grow in the right way. We've got enough big sheds now. That's great. We've got lots and lots of warehousing that make best use of the infrastructure that's around it, and that's great. But we also have really interesting businesses here. Companies like Photocentric, for example, doing very, very interesting things. We do interesting things. But if people don't know about it, then it's not going to grow, is it? So it's been our responsibility and our mission in terms of getting that word out there. If people can't see and know who we are, then we're never going to grow as a business. So we do interact with the college and the UTC and the local schools. We do have a cohort every year from one or other of the schools that come here, and have a sort of 3 or 4 hour taster of what composites is about. And that's important because if you are an engineer, and it doesn't matter whether you're automotive, aerospace, mechanical, composites is going to touch your world when you leave college or when you leave university. So come and have a look at it. Come and see what it is. Try and understand a little bit about that, which is why we work very closely with the college and the UTC, and we do their careers fair. In fact, we're putting in a small facility into the UTC so they can actually add composites as a module for the engineering students. And that's great because, again, it's about exposure, and it's about exposure on their doorstep. You can be that. If you want to play around with Formula One or aerospace or whatever it is, you can do it here, and you can use interesting materials. And it's an expanding market. It's expanding exponentially. You can't shake a stick without hitting a carbon fiber version of anything, whether it's sporting goods or prosthetics or car interiors, and so it just goes on and on. So it's going to touch their world at some stage. So you kind of want to encourage them to get on board, or at least understand something about it. So when they are sitting in an interview for a job and they start talking to the potential interviewers about composites, I promise you, you'll be the smartest one in the room, because it's still a bit of a sort of shrouded in some sort of weird mystery, and I'm not entirely sure why. And that's probably because as an industry, we're poor at actually giving that message out.
Maybe it's just that it's not well known about generally, or maybe I don't know, people haven't looked at it as a career, but that's why you're doing these events. What generally with young people, how easy do you think it is for them in the job market and thinking about their futures at the moment? Not necessarily here, but generally as a whole. I mean, you must obviously speak to a lot of young people. Yeah. What's it like for them?
It's difficult. It always has been, and always probably will be. It can be a little bit overwhelming, and I think it's the responsibility of industry and businesses like us to actually get that message out there. Unfortunately, there seems to be a trope of complaining about the fact that the students don't come out work ready. They don't enter the working world with any sort of education about what work is like, etc., etc. I don't think that's the responsibility of the educational facilities, if I'm brutally honest. I think it's our responsibility.
Yeah.
Engage. If you want to solve that recruitment problem, you've got to put the spade work in. You've got to engage with the universities and the colleges, etc., and tell people what you do and why they should come and work for you. What does that career look like? Because, it comes as no surprise to anybody, when I left school, this industry didn't exist. This was all very new. And one of the things, I'd encourage, those youths leaving school today, don't stress about the fact that you're not going to, you don't have a career trajectory mapped out in front of you. Get a job. It'll find you eventually. You get amongst various sort of industries and talk to people and so on. You'll find your niche eventually, for sure.
I hope you're right. And a lot of the time, I mean, I've spoken to colleges and universities, and they appreciate that it has to be. We can't just push kids out the door and say, right, you've got your qualification, time to crack on. It is that sort of earlier relationship between local businesses, local companies and the colleges. And of course the student has to be engaged with it to some degree, but that's how we should be in the 21st century, I'd hope, anyway.
Well, of course, and every business is an individual business. It has its own specific needs. How is an educational facility going to manage that? It's got enough problems of its own. Actually trying to get them out the door with, some semblance of an education. So it shouldn't be their responsibility, in my opinion.
Talking about young people and things, one of the things that I speak to them about, a lot of young people are concerned about AI Now, I presume AI is used within your company to some degree. I may be wrong. What are your thoughts on it as a whole?
We don't use it directly yet. We will. It will support us in terms of some of the programming that we do, without a doubt. Our only exposure to AI probably is some of the CVs that come in.
Right. Okay.
That's probably what's the most immediate. Yeah, they're not great. So yeah, it will affect us,
as
sure.
It will every
absolutely
industry,
and we've got to be ready for that. We do have to maintain a level of education ourselves about what's happening and how we get on board with that, and how we need to get on board with that.
You spoke. We've spoken a little bit about the past. Should we talk about the present and the future a little bit? Now, before we started, you mentioned a couple of very exciting projects. Whether you can mention them or not for the future, I don't know. But what's the future hold? What are you excited about as well at the moment?
Oh, the industry as a whole is personally, I just think it's in a fantastic place at the moment. The use of composites, particularly carbon fibre, has been around for a few years now. We all recognise that. And its purpose in that has been around lightweighting, for example. If you want to move mass, the lighter you make that mass, the more efficient it is to move it. So carbon fibre is a sort of natural medium for people to gravitate towards to solve that problem. It has a particular sort of high strength to weight ratio, of course. The downside is you look at the process of making carbon fibre in the first place. It uses huge amounts of energy and water. The end of life element of carbon fibre isn't great either, to be fair. How we get rid of it at the end of its life is still being worked on. There are a few companies around trying to recycle carbon fibre, but nobody's really got that taped yet. Right. So over the project, you look at it and go, well, it's still a net gain as far as sustainability is concerned. However, we've got to do something about those two end parts still, and we are doing things about that. And there is the introduction of more sustainable materials. We did a project a few years ago for an electric all-terrain vehicle where all of the bodywork was made out of flax and a bio-based resin system. So essentially made of grass. Worked very, very well.
Okay.
There's an example of part of that in reception out there, John.
Okay.
And not only were we able to achieve that, we were able to measure the CO2 savings by doing that instead of using carbon fibre. So you look at it and go, well, actually, now that's not going to be the solution to the problem. It's just another club in the bag. And you go, well, let's do that instead of carbon fibre where we can. We've just done a sports car project at the back end of last year, which will be launched at the end of March. It's a great fanfare, so you'll see it then, John. We can't talk about it yet. But that bodywork was made out of a combination of flax, basalt, and a resin system derived from sugarcane. So this whole thing is 98% sustainable, compostable, biodegradable. It was a really exciting project for us and for me. We worked very closely again with their engineering department and their designers, the material manufacturers. It's the first time that palette of material has been used in that way. So that excites me. I mean, we're a company that has ISO 14001. Sustainability is woven into the fabric of our business. It's something that we do and we take very seriously. So as part of that, it's exciting to do. And at the other end of the scale, we've got very advanced materials, the sort of nanotechnologies of carbon fibre and materials like graphene, for example. It's tantalizingly close to being commercially available, it seems, forever, and it has been for a while. When that does actually become commercially available, it will be a game changer for our industry. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So it's exciting to be part of that or know what's going on and trying to stay at that sort of pointy end of our industry. Because like I say, when we set this thing up to be that sort of end-to-end solutions provider, it's also key to us as a business to stay, like I say, at the pointy end of our industry and know what's going on and where the developments are. We want to be in a position, for example, certainly within the year, where when we give an invoice to a company, we go, this is how much it cost you, this is how much it cost the planet. These are the CO2 emissions associated with that project. What they do with that information is up to them, but it's there.
Yeah, but they have it.
They have it.
And then they can act on it in the
Absolutely.
future, or go elsewhere if they want, or invest more in Codem.
Well, Formula One, for example, is committed to being net zero by 2030. I'm not quite sure how they're going to manage that, but it forms part of it. They have a sustainability department these days, and we're having those conversations about how, firstly, we measure, so we all understand what the baseline looks like and how we improve from there. So those conversations are going on all the time, and again, it's those next steps for our industry and where it's going.
Okay, so where do you see that in 15, 20 years' time? Is it possible to predict that at all?
No. There are patents being registered all the time in our industry for new materials and new advanced materials. So what's next, I don't know. But I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the reality.
You're going to be there for
exactly.
it. So
yeah.
So for somebody who's not in this industry, when you're telling me these things, it sounds like some of it sounds like sort of science fiction almost. It's such an exciting thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, we're moving into those sort of a new space age, which is great. It's a thrill for me personally to see us, potentially going back to the moon and all of that, because it's very evocative of my own childhood, of course. Yes. And of course our materials are what help make that happen. Unless we're using those advanced materials that can be very strong and lightweight and sustain, extreme temperatures and so on, and changes in temperature, for example. It's an exciting place to be.
It sure is. As somebody who didn't know anything about it, you've excited me about it. So, just a couple more questions. You mentioned earlier on about obviously you are very interested in how colleges and universities. How much do you give back to the local area in terms of with schools, but also other sort of community projects that you might have as well?
As we touched on before, we engage with the local educational establishments. We're also involved with the cathedral, which is a building that's very dear to me. We're also recently engaged with the local prison. We've actually set up a training school within the prison here in Peterborough.
Yeah.
It took us best part of 2 years to get there. We started our first cohort in November. We've got a cohort of 10 in there, and we will slowly build that up to a training school that will accommodate potentially around 25.
So these are prisoners who have an interest in engineering, design, whatever it is, and you're helping them, or is it earlier than that? What's the...
Well, when we started thinking about the actual starting point for this was around the cost of training.
Okay.
We have apprentices here, we have apprenticeships here on the engineering side. Unfortunately, there isn't a college who will take on a level 3 composites technician qualification or apprenticeship, because they just can't get a cohort big enough to make it viable.
Yeah.
So we have to manage our own in-house training. Now, that's been fine. It's something we've done, for for as long as we've been going, of course. It's become very expensive to do. For example, you take somebody on today with no experience. So they've just walked through the door. They don't necessarily bring any relevant skills either. And you're talking about a cost of minimum wage being, time you bolt on the national insurance and pensions and all the rest of it, you're looking at 30K. Okay. Now, a few years ago, we'd take on 4 or 5 trainees, for example. And if we've got 2 of them at the end of 2 years, great, that works. That model doesn't work anymore. So how do we think about mitigating some of those costs? Because it doesn't just involve that 30K you're paying that individual. You've then got to pay an experienced person to teach them as well. So you've got that on cost.
And that's the time of that as well to do it. Yeah.
From day one to that trainee, getting to a point where they wash their own face financially, you're talking about 9 to 12 months in that sort of range. Well, if they don't make it after a 6-month period, that's a bunch of change walking down the road. So we wanted to think about how we might mitigate that and it was a fever dream or whatever it was. It occurred to me to go, well, let's talk to the prison. Surely they'd lock up engineers as much as anybody else or any other trade. So we started to have that dialogue, and we visited a number of prisons to see what their training schools look like, what their workshops look like. Peterborough's wasn't great. However, Ralph, the governor there now, is much more open-minded and forward-thinking in terms of what he wants to do with that prison. So we started that dialogue. And we talked to people, we went into the prison and we talked to people, and it was a real eye-opener, and I think I've told this story before. One of the first people we talked to when we got there is a GP, involved in a road traffic accident. Somebody died, he was culpable, he's looking at 7 years in prison. Now, you kind of go, well, at the spin of a coin, that could be any of us.
Yeah.
Wrong place, wrong time, whatever.
Yeah.
Now, clearly there are some hermits in there who need to stay there and, etc. But there is a cross section, and there are some who want to put their lives back together again and want to do something constructive. There's a lot of time on their hands, of course, when they're in prison. So consequently, doing something constructive with it makes sense. So we kind of looked at it, and the more we explored it, there couldn't, to me, there didn't look like a reason not to do it, quite frankly. Peterborough has a quite high percentage of remand prisoners. So consequently, they have quite a throughput, which was one of the things that interested us, that if they could get onto a training program that is 6 to 12 months long within the prison, by the time they come out and we offer them a job, they can at least hit the ground walking quite quickly. And we'll see if that's true. We've got our first trainee hopefully joining us at the end of this month. He's due for release at the end of March. So he's been through the program for the last sort of 5 months. So we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see how that works. And so, in a year's time, ask me if it was a good idea, and I'll tell you, hopefully, yes.
Okay. And just to wrap up then, you're positive about everything, positive about the future of Peterborough and as a whole and the company?
Our industry, as I say, is growing exponentially, and we manage to catch the coattails of some of that. We do find ourselves doing some really interesting projects. So yeah, I'm very, very optimistic about the future. I mean, I'm optimistic about the future of the city too. Eventually it will shape that market town mentality and stand up and go, actually, this is what we are and this is what we can be. We know we're not York, we're not Cambridge, or etc. But we're better than a lot of places for sure, I think. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.